What would you do if the ocean spoke your name? In the cold silence beneath the waves, a rescue mission turns into a descent into the unknown, where forgotten relics of ancient life still breathe and remember. When a missing submarine is found in the black pit of the Atlantic, two divers uncover more than wreckage. They awaken something. This is not just a story of survival, it's a warning of what lies beneath and why some parts of the ocean were never meant to be explored. They said the house breathes when no one is watching. The moment Casey Whitmore turned the rusty key and stepped inside the old Victorian house at the edge of Rowan Hill, the air felt different, not just cold, but aware. As if the walls had been waiting. Her boots echoed against the warped wooden floor, and dust swirled lazily in the slant of afternoon light, cutting through the cracked window panes. The house had been vacant for over 40 years, they said. A landmark. A warning. But the price had been too good to pass up, and after years of drifting between rented apartments and her mother's basement in Indianapolis, Casey needed a place to land, somewhere quiet, isolated. She hadn't expected the silence to be so heavy. The front hall smelled faintly of cedar and old smoke. Layers of wallpaper curled like dead leaves along the corridor. To the right, a parlor opened, draped in yellowed sheets. To the left, a staircase rose in a steep, elegant curve, its banister polished by 1,000 forgotten hands. Casey left her suitcase by the door and wandered through the space, fingertips grazing the flanking trim. Every room seemed to sigh under the weight of memory. She could almost hear piano notes lingering in the dining room, or the hush of a conversation that ended too quickly. The realtor, an older woman with stained fingertips and a tremor in her voice, had given her a fast-talking history lesson before handing over the deed. Built in 1889, tied to the Thorne family, you know, the ones who ran the orphanage? Well, it burned down in '54. Nobody talks about it anymore. But that house, it's seen things. Casey had laughed, politely. People said things like that in small towns. Ghost stories were their currency. Now, standing in the center of the parlor, she wasn't laughing. A cold draft swept from beneath the hallway door, whispering past her ankles. Casey turned sharply, eyes scanning the shadows that pooled in the corners. Just a draft, she told herself. The place needed repairs. Upstairs, the floorboards creaked. She held still, waited. Nothing followed. Shaking off the tension, she headed for the kitchen at the rear of the house. The appliances were decades out of date, and the smell of mildew clung to the cabinets, but it was nothing a good scrub couldn't fix. Her phone had no signal, and the electricity hadn't been restored yet, but she had matches and a camping lantern from the truck. A sound came then, soft, distant, like fingernails on plaster. Not loud, but deliberate. Casey froze. It had come from the stairwell. She waited a full minute before daring to move. Grabbing her lantern, she stepped slowly into the hall. The staircase loomed ahead, and now, in the deepening dusk, its top melted into darkness. "Hello?" she called, her voice thin against the silence. "Is someone there?" No answer. Of course not. She climbed the stairs one careful step at a time, the lantern casting long, twitching shadows across the faded wallpaper. At the top, a hallway stretched left and right, 6 doors. Most were closed. The bedroom she'd chosen was the second on the right. She stepped inside and exhaled slowly. The room was large and cold, the windows shuttered. An antique vanity stood against one wall, mirror clouded with age. The bed frame was wrought iron, still sturdy beneath the sheet that draped it. Casey lit a second lantern and set it by the mirror. Her reflection flickered, uncertain. It would take some getting used to, the isolation, the quiet, the way time seemed to stretch and bend in places like this. Unpacking could wait. She laid her duffel on the floor and pulled out a thick sweater. As she bent to unzip the second bag, something shifted behind her in the mirror. She turned fast. Nothing. The hallway was empty. She laughed nervously, shaking her head. She'd been too long in cities, Her imagination hadn't caught up with the silence yet. Later, she sat cross-legged on the floor of the parlor, with a can of soup balanced on a camping stove, her phone still useless in her lap. The lantern's glow painted the walls in flickers. She scrolled through old town maps saved on her tablet, tracing the outline of the property. Rowan Hill, population 1,327. Her nearest neighbor was nearly a mile away. The local historical society's website was sparse, but she bookmarked a few entries about the Thorn Orphanage, now listed as a condemned ruin west of town. Most of the pages were just names and dry facts, but one caught her eye: Thorn House Folklore, the Whispering Room. The entry was short, just 2 paragraphs. Local legend holds that the original master bedroom of the Thorn residence, now abandoned, was the site of a ritual intended to protect the family from a generational curse. The room is said to whisper back to anyone who enters alone at night. Several reports from the 1960s detail unexplained voices, cold spots, and missing time associated with the room. Casey looked up. Her bedroom. She read the paragraph again. The air around her grew still, heavy. Then she heard it, faint but clear. A soft knock. 3 slow taps. Coming from upstairs. She didn't move. The spoon trembled in her hand. It came again. 3 knocks. She grabbed her flashlight and moved to the staircase, lantern swinging by her side. At the top, the hallway was colder, darker. The door to her room stood open. She had closed it, she was sure. She stepped inside, heart thudding. The window shutters were still sealed, and yet the air moved, as if the room exhaled. And then, the mirror. A shape in the glass. White. Still. She turned instantly. Nothing there. But in the reflection, the white remained. A pale silhouette standing just behind her shoulder. Casey spun back again. The room was empty. But the mirror kept showing her otherwise. And this time, the shape raised its hand and knocked once, right against the inside of the glass. Casey staggered back, nearly toppling the lantern. The mirror didn't crack. The glass didn't shatter. But the handprint remained, fogged against the surface from the inside. 5 long fingers splayed wide, as if something or someone had leaned in from the other side. She clenched her jaw, heart jackhammering, and forced herself to stare into it. The reflection was calm now, still. Her face, pale and tight, flickered beneath the dim glow of the lantern. No shape, no shadow, no hand, just the breath mark slowly fading away. She turned on her heel and backed out of the room, slamming the door. The sound echoed through the old house like a gunshot. Casey bolted down the stairs, breath ragged, knuckles white on the railing. Back in the parlor, she paced in tight circles around the cold hearth, whispering aloud just to hear a voice, even if it was her own. "You're tired. You're alone. It was a trick of the light. Just nerves." Still, she didn't go back upstairs that night. Instead, she laid her sleeping bag across the sagging couch, placed both lanterns beside her, and kept the flashlight clutched in one hand like a weapon. Her phone screen remained stubbornly blank. No signal, no bars, no service. It was like the house sat just outside the edge of the world. Eventually, somewhere between 2 and 3 a.m., sleep claimed her, but it was not peaceful. She dreamed of fire, children screaming in a long hallway, hands pressed against windows that wouldn't open, a woman in black at the top of the stairs, face eaten away by darkness, the smell of burnt hair and ash, and the mirror. Always the mirror, glowing silver in the smoke. She woke with a start to find both lanterns flickering. The air was ice cold. Something moved in the corner. Casey jolted upright, heart slamming against her ribs. She turned the flashlight. Nothing. Just her bag, half unzipped, and the empty hearth. But the uneasy feeling didn't pass. It clung to her like a second skin. At sunrise, she made coffee on the camping stove with shaking hands. Her reflection in the dusty parlor mirror looked older, worn, like she hadn't just spent a single night here, but many. She needed answers. Rowan Hill's library was housed inside a converted church near the town square. Stained glass windows cast blue and red light across the aisles, and the librarian, a gaunt man with nicotine-stained fingers, watched her with vague curiosity as she browsed the local history section. She found a box of news clippings stored in battered binders behind the counter. Most were yellowed, brittle, some handwritten. But one article, from the Rowan Hill Gazette dated October 1963, caught her breath. Local woman claims haunted mirror caused disappearance. The piece was short and sensational, exactly the kind of filler for slow news weeks. But it mentioned the house. Her house. Mrs. Edna Collier, resident of Rowan Hill since 1929, claims her husband vanished after spending a night in the master bedroom of the old Thorne property. According to Mrs. Collier, a mirror in the room reflected a stranger instead of my Harold. Local authorities found no signs of forced entry. The house has remained unoccupied since. Beneath the article, a photo, grainy in black and white, showed the same mirror now sitting in her upstairs room. Distinctive wrought iron frame, oval shape. A strange swirl etched into the glass at the top, almost like an eye. Casey snapped a picture of it with her phone. Her hand trembled. The librarian glanced over. "Looking into the Thorne place, huh?" She hesitated. "You know about it?" He nodded slowly. "Everyone does. But most of us know better than to go near it, especially that upstairs room." "What happened there?" He shrugged. "Depends who you ask. Some say it was cursed long before the fire. Others think it's just a magnet for bad memories. I've heard folks say the mirror is a doorway, that it lets things through." Casey felt a chill spider down her spine. Back at the house, she hesitated on the porch before re-entering. It was only noon, but the light seemed duller than it should be. Gray, sullen, like the sky was holding its breath. She avoided the upstairs. Instead, she wandered to the rear of the property, where a stone path, half swallowed by weeds, led to a sagging greenhouse. The glass panes were broken in places, vines creeping up through the floor. Inside, rusted gardening tools hung from the walls. A journal lay beneath a pile of cracked terracotta pots. She picked it up, wiped the dust, and opened the first page. October 3, 1931. The whispers are getting louder. Page after page, the same handwriting, neat, cursive, feminine. The writer never signed a name, but the entries hinted at a woman, possibly one of the Thornes. She described a mirror that reflected things she hadn't done yet, a voice that called her name in her sleep, a door in her dreams that never quite opened. "Last night I saw my son, but he was older. His eyes were wrong. He kept asking me to follow. I don't think it was him. I burned the old frame, but the glass won't shatter. I buried it in the floorboards. I think... It came back." The last page was splattered with something brown and stiff with age. Just 3 words were scrawled across it. "Don't look in." Casey stepped back, spine rigid. The greenhouse suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. That night, she couldn't help herself. She returned to the room. The mirror was still there, waiting. The lanterns cast long shadows across the carpet as she approached. Her own face stared back, tense, pale, uncertain. "I'm not afraid of you," she whispered. The mirror did not blink. But slowly, the light behind her shifted. No source, no bulb, just a dim golden glow that filled the glass but not the room. And in the reflection, behind her, the silhouette again, this time closer, clearer. It was her. Same eyes, same hair, but not quite. The smile was wrong. The eyes were hungry. She turned fast, saw nothing, looked back, and the other her was mouthing something. No sound, just silent words, lips moving in rhythm. Casey leaned in, trying to read. The reflection smiled wider. Then it wrote, in fog on the inside of the glass, "Let me out." The mirror rattled, just once, hard enough to crack the frame. Casey stumbled back, knocking over the lantern. It went dark. The mirror flashed, bright white, then pitch black. From inside it, a hand slammed forward, pressing against the glass with impossible force. Cracks spidered across the surface. The air grew heavy, buzzing with static. And then a voice, whisper thin. It came not from the room, but inside her head. "You came back. You belong here now." The last thing she saw before running was her own reflection walking away from the mirror. Without her. The storm had passed, but the stillness it left behind was worse. Casey stepped onto the warped porch boards, their creaks oddly muffled in the damp morning. The old house stood silent as if watching her. Every instinct said to leave, to pack up the car and drive back to Boston, or better yet, never return. But something about the place, something deeper than fear, rooted in bone and memory, kept her tethered. The mirror hadn't moved during the night, neither had she, at least not physically. But her dreams had wandered. A boy's voice had whispered to her again and again, calling her name, always from the other side of a door she couldn't find. She'd woken in a cold sweat with the image of her own face burned into her mind, only not quite her, older, paler, eyes too wide. In the daylight, she told herself it was stress, unprocessed grief maybe. After all, moving alone into a house like this wasn't exactly healthy behavior, and her therapist had been hesitant when she'd mentioned the inheritance. But the truth? Casey hadn't come looking for healing. She came looking for something buried. The library in town was half a post office, half a relic. Tucked behind a hardware store with faded signage, it held a handful of shelves and a corner labeled Local Interest. She didn't expect much, but the librarian, an elderly woman with clouded eyes and a name tag that read Irene, perked up at the mention of the Thorn House. "You said your name is Fletcher?" Irene asked, her voice paper thin. "Yes, Casey Fletcher. It belonged to my grandmother, Elizabeth." Irene's eyes narrowed slightly. "Elizabeth Thorne. I remember her. She left here when I was just a girl. There was talk, of course, but no one ever really knew what happened." "What kind of talk?" A pause, then slowly. "That place isn't just haunted, dear. It remembers. Bad things grow roots there." Casey waited. Irene finally moved from behind the desk and motioned her toward the back, unlocking a drawer with a soft metallic click. She handed over a box of newspaper clippings, bound in twine. Casey sat on the floor and sifted through them. The further back she went, the stranger the stories became. 1954. Local boy disappears from attic during sleepover. 1946. Thorn widow insists mirror predicts death. 1932. Funeral held for sisters lost in house fire, no bodies recovered. Each clipping mentioned the property, but always in fragment. A footnote here, a quote there. No coherent narrative, but a pattern emerged, one that revolved around that mirror upstairs. She copied every address, date, and name she could find. That night, she stood before the mirror again. It no longer surprised her that she kept returning. The draw was magnetic. The frame still bore the etched symbols she couldn't decipher. She'd tried to clean it earlier, but no matter how much she scrubbed, a faint haze remained on the glass, like breath or memory trapped inside. "Tell me what you are," she whispered. For a moment, she could almost believe she saw movement behind her, not in the reflection, but beyond it, within it. Then a shape emerged in the glass, faint, far away, as though seen through fog or deep water. Human, but not quite. It stood motionless, its eyes glowing faintly like coals in the dark. She didn't move, didn't breathe. The figure didn't blink. It simply raised one hand and tapped the glass, once. The sound was flat and distant, as if echoing from another world. Then it vanished. Casey stepped back. She didn't scream. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because part of her had expected it, willed it, maybe. She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she visited Irene again. The librarian met her with a tight frown and slid a worn leather-bound ledger across the counter. "I didn't want to show you this yesterday," Irene admitted, but something told me you wouldn't stop digging. Your grandmother checked this out in 1962. It's not from any publisher I know. The book was untitled, just a cover stamped with the symbol from the mirror's frame. Inside were entries in various handwriting styles, diagrams, notes, prayers, warnings, rituals. Some were in Latin, others in symbols Casey couldn't decode, but one passage had been underlined in ink that had long since turned brown. Reflections are agreements, doorways made by belief. The more one looks, the more it sees. Do not speak to the glass. Do not answer the questions. Above all, do not let it remember your name. Casey's breath hitched. She flipped to the back of the book. Tucked between two brittle pages was a Polaroid photo, aged and cracked. A woman stood before the mirror, back turned to the camera. Her hair was familiar, so was the coat. Her grandmother, and scribbled across the bottom, in shaky black pen. I locked it in, but it's always hungry. If I fail, burn the floorboards beneath the frame. That night, Casey carried a crowbar up the stairs. Her hands trembled as she pried up the warped boards beneath the mirror's stand. At first, she saw nothing, just dirt and dust. But then, a bundle wrapped in old velvet. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside lay a smaller mirror, identical frame, identical symbols, but cracked down the center, clean and deep. The air around it pulsed faintly, like a second heartbeat. As she stared, something pressed against the glass from the inside. Fingers, thin, wet, pale. She dropped it and backed away. The upstairs mirror shuddered. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through her teeth. Her reflection was gone. In its place stood the girl from the dream, the not her, dressed in the same sweater, same face. But the eyes, those were wrong. The mirror groaned. The girl smiled and whispered, "You remember now, don't you?" The floorboards beneath Casey gave a sudden creak, and from behind the mirror a hand reached out. Real, not glass, grabbing her ankle with ice-cold fingers. She screamed. Darkness rushed in from all sides. Then silence. They say shock dulls pain, but Casey felt everything. The cold fingers around her ankle, the bite of splinters as her knees slammed into the wooden floor, the high-pitched ringing in her ears that drowned out her own scream. And then, just silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the oppressive, breathless hush of a house that had decided it no longer needed to pretend it was asleep. She scrambled back, kicking wildly until the hand vanished beneath the mirror's base with a wet, slurping sound. The hardwood was slick where it touched her ankle, not with blood, but with something else. Something that shimmered faintly in the dull morning light creeping through the attic window. Her breath came in ragged bursts. She wanted to leave, run, smash every reflective surface in the house and never look back. But instead, she crawled forward. She had to see. Had to know. The mirror stood there, still and inert again, its surface showing only her reflection now, her real one. Hair in disarray, face pale, eyes wild. The cracked handheld mirror she'd uncovered still lay where she'd dropped it, humming softly, the vibration now so subtle it felt more like a presence than a sound. And just beneath it, the floor. Still warm. She hesitated, then lifted the small mirror once more, careful not to look directly into it. Beneath, in the disturbed dust, she could now see it more clearly. A symbol carved into the floorboards, circular, interlocking. The same symbol etched into the larger mirror's frame. She took a photo with her phone, fingers trembling, then pocketed both the cracked mirror and the velvet cloth. She needed help. Not the police, not a priest, not anyone who'd just call her delusional and start quoting medication dosages. No, she needed someone who believed. That meant only one person, Marcus Belden. It had been years since she'd seen him. He was once a professor at Emerson, focused on fringe folklore and post-ritual trauma, a class she'd taken out of curiosity during undergrad. He'd been fired after publishing a paper that the university deemed dangerous pseudoscience, and last she heard he ran a blog about mirror cults and reflective gateways that was only accessible via Tor. She found his contact buried in an old email thread, a burner address with a single instruction in the signature line. Subject must include reflective threshold or will be ignored. She hesitated only a moment before typing, subject, reflective, threshold. I think I've found a living mirror. I'm at the Thorn Estate in Willow Creek. There's a second, cracked version hidden beneath the floorboards. It's grabbed me. I'm not hurt, but it knows my name. I think it's feeding. Please respond. Casey Fletcher. She hit send and stared at the screen until her eyes blurred. No response. An hour passed. Still nothing. She paced the kitchen, made coffee, threw it away. Paced again, checked the attic. Nothing had moved. Not the mirror, not the floor. Finally, at 2:13 p.m., her phone buzzed. Unknown sender. Meet me at the Old Mill Tavern, 4 o'clock, ... Come alone. Bring the cracked mirror. Do not speak to anyone else between now and then. They listen. Casey's stomach twisted. She didn't ask how he knew to be that specific. She just went. The Old Mill Tavern sat at the edge of town, nestled between a shuttered train depot and an overgrown field that smelled like rust and weeds. Inside, it was dim, all red leather booths and ancient ceiling fans that squeaked with every slow revolution. Marcus Belden looked exactly as she remembered. Unkempt beard, eyes too sharp to belong to a madman, too intense to belong to a skeptic. He didn't say hello. Instead, he pointed to the cracked mirror in her bag and said, "It's breathing, isn't it?" Casey blinked. "Excuse me? That hum you feel, like it's vibrating? That's its respiration cycle. You've already initiated contact, which means the bigger one upstairs is aware." Fully aware now, Casey stiffened. "You knew?" "I knew the house had one. I didn't know anyone had fed it recently." "Fed it?" she echoed. Marcus leaned in, voice low. "Mirrors like that don't reflect. They mimic. And once a name is spoken aloud before them, a bond forms." "You said it knows your name?" She nodded slowly. "Then you're already partway through the ritual. The more you engage, dream about it, fear it, look into it, the more permission you give it." Casey swallowed hard. Permission for what? Marcus didn't answer directly. Instead, he opened a small notebook and laid it flat between them. On the page was a crude map of the Thorn House, with symbols scrawled over each floor. A thick red circle marked the attic. "The mirror was sealed once before," he said. "I believe by your grandmother." "Grandma did buy?" "But she didn't destroy it. Likely couldn't. These artifacts aren't just objects. They're vessels. They're only dormant between hosts." "Hosts? You." Casey stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "No. I didn't ask for this." "No one does," Marcus said calmly. "But once you respond, once you look too long, think too deeply, it begins. That's why I told you not to speak to anyone else. It listens through reflections, not just mirrors. Windows, puddles, screen blackouts, anything that bounces your image back at you." Casey felt sick. Her phone, her bathroom, the hallway window. "How do I stop it?" Marcus took a long breath. "You can't. Not entirely, but you can trick it, mislead it, cut off the bond before it finalizes." "Finalize?" she asked. Marcus looked her in the eye. "When it speaks your full name. That's the end. That's when the threshold opens completely." Casey sat down again. The cracked mirror pulsed once inside her bag, as if responding to the very words. Marcus slid a piece of paper toward her. On it were 3 rules, handwritten. Cover all reflective surfaces by nightfall. Do not dream without a barrier beneath your bed. Do not respond if it calls you by name, not even once. "If it speaks my name, I lose?" she asked. "You become it," he replied. "Or worse, you become the window it crawls through." The room seemed to tilt slightly as he said it. The ceiling fan spun faster for a moment, though no one had touched it. Casey looked down at her coffee. Its surface was rippling, but there was no breeze, and in that dark ripple, just for a blink, her reflection smiled back. Not her reflection. That night, Casey didn't sleep. Not because she didn't try, but because someone, kept whispering her name. Not aloud, not in the way you'd expect. The whispers came from inside things, from the glint of the faucet as she brushed her teeth, from the blackened glass of the microwave door, from the small puddle of rainwater that had gathered by the back door. Casey Fletcher. She stuffed towels over the mirrors, threw sheets over the TV screen, used her old college hoodie to block the bathroom mirror, duct taped black trash bags across windows. But no matter what she covered, her reflection kept finding ways to leak through. Distorted, fragmented, misplaced. At one point, she caught her reflection blinking half a second out of sync. She screamed, not loud, not long, but enough to feel her throat tighten in revolt. The attic, of course, remained untouched. She hadn't dared go near it since returning from the meeting with Marcus. He'd warned her. The large mirror upstairs was the core vessel, and disrupting it before understanding the full binding could be dangerous. Dangerous how? He hadn't elaborated. He rarely did. Instead, he'd handed her a satchel filled with odd items. Sea salt, dried rosemary, obsidian shards, a strip of iron, a hand-drawn sigil carved into bark, and told her where to place each around the house. Protection circles, isolation wards. He'd also given her a vial of thick black oil with one final warning. If it tries to call your name again, drip a single line of this across the floor leading to the mirror. Then run. Run where? There was nowhere to run. The house was old, labyrinthine, and more than once that night, she heard footsteps in rooms she hadn't entered. Breathing behind doors she'd locked, as the sound of drawers sliding open upstairs, even though she was alone. At least, she thought she was. Casey huddled on the couch, wrapped in 2 blankets, the cracked mirror sitting inside a bowl of salt on the coffee table. It pulsed once every few minutes, faint, like a heartbeat. At 2:31 a.m., she got an email from Marcus. Subject: the second stage has begun. You've likely begun experiencing phase slippage, displaced reflections, whispers, the mirror's opening. When the clock hits 3:13, it will attempt first invocation. Do not speak. Do not look into it directly. Record everything you see from the corner of your eye. I'll arrive by 4 o'clock. Burn nothing, touch nothing. Especially the glass. Stay awake, MB. She read it twice, then turned off all the lights except for a single candle. The house didn't feel like hers anymore. It felt occupied, like a stranger had invited themselves in, draped themselves in her skin, and was now waiting for the right moment to step out and say hello. At 3:12 a.m., her phone froze, then died. She hadn't touched it. No low battery, no crash, just sudden lifeless darkness. And in that blank mirrored screen, there it was, her reflection, smiling again. This time, it moved. It raised a hand, slowly, precisely, and waved. Casey dropped the phone. It shattered against the floor, screen spiderwebbing out like broken ice. She backed away until her legs hit the wall, breathing shallow, eyes wide. The cracked mirror began to vibrate violently, the hum building into a low drone. She reached for the black oil, fumbled the cap. From somewhere upstairs, a voice called her name. Casey Fletcher. Not like a whisper now, like a chant, measured, ritualistic, drawn out over syllables that didn't belong in any human throat. She grabbed the oil and dashed to the stairwell. It was dark, darker than it should have been. Each step groaned underfoot. The air smelled different, damp, like soil and old teeth. She reached the attic door. The chant had stopped. Only silence remained. She opened the door. The mirror stood where it had always stood, except now the cracks had vanished. Its surface was perfectly smooth, seamless, black as obsidian, and just as still. She stepped closer and saw it. Herself. Not distorted, not twisted, but perfect. Too perfect, because the reflection didn't blink, didn't move, didn't breathe, but smiled. The same smile as always, wide, knowing. And then it spoke. Casey Fletch, 2 words, spoken in her voice, but from its mouth. She froze. The oil. She raised the vial and poured a thick line across the wooden floor in front of the mirror. The surface rippled, like water, and then cracked. Just once. A fissure. Tiny, barely visible. The reflection smile faded, and its eyes turned, not looking at her, but beyond her, to something behind her. Casey spun. Nothing. No, wait. The shadows near the far wall were moving, stretching, reaching, as if responding to the invocation. Her body screamed for her to run, but her feet wouldn't move. The mirror's hum grew louder, deeper, and from its surface 2 pale hands began to push through. Not a reflection, not glass, flesh. Bone, knuckles first, then wrists, dripping with ink-like liquid that hissed against the wooden floor. She stepped back, heart hammering, and then it paused. Just for a second, the hand stopped, froze mid-emerge. The fissure across the mirror's surface began to glow faintly red. It didn't like the oil, didn't like the salt. That much was clear. And then, from behind her, the sound of footsteps, real ones. She turned again, expecting Marcus, but it wasn't him. Standing at the base of the attic stairs was herself. Another Casey, eyes wide, lips parted, clothes identical, mouth moving, but no sound came out. Just one motion, a single hand raised and pointed at her, the real her. Casey gasped. The hands in the mirror surged forward, and the glass shattered inward. Casey hit the floor hard. Splinters bit into her palms as she scrambled backward, choking on dust and the thick, sulfurous stink flooding the attic air. The sound of the mirror shattering had been wrong. Not the crisp chime of glass breaking, but a deep, wet crack like bone snapping under pressure. And now the thing, whatever it was trying to climb through. Not the reflection, not anymore. It was real. Its arms, impossibly long, dragged across the attic floorboards. Thin, jointed wrong, like too many elbows, like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. The hands were her hands, but they moved in ways hers never could, twitchy, erratic, convulsing with too much speed or not enough. From the broken frame of the mirror, a thick sludge poured in waves, sizzling against the wood. It smelled like ash, iron, and something else. Something alive. Casey scrambled back, nearly falling down the attic stairs. Her legs buckled halfway down and she tumbled the last 3 steps, crashing onto the landing below. The air downstairs was cold, unnaturally so, but clear. No sludge, no sulfur, yet. She pushed the door closed and locked it, not that it would help. Behind her, the living room lights flickered. The covered mirrors trembled under their cloths, twitching like they were trying to breathe. Casey didn't wait. She ran. Through the kitchen, out the back door, barefoot over the wet grass and broken twigs. The night was slick with rain and wind. She didn't care. She didn't stop until she reached the tree line, by the old oak, where Marcus had parked the night before. Gone. No car, no Marcus. Just empty gravel and the howling wind. She stared back at the house. It loomed against the sky like something that had forgotten how to be a home. Just then a soft knock echoed behind her. Not from the house, from inside her head. "Casey, you left the door open." She spun. No one. Only the trees, swaying violently, their branches cracking and snapping like bones. Then she noticed it. A trail in the grass, dark, thick, oily, leading from the house, across the yard toward where she stood, toward her. She backed away, heart drumming a brutal rhythm. The trail pulsed, the air shimmered, like heat on asphalt, but it was cold, bone-deep cold, and then she heard footsteps. Behind her. This time, real. She turned. Marcus stood there, soaked from rain, hair plastered to his forehead. He looked like hell. You opened it, he said. She nodded, trembling. It came through. He didn't ask what it meant. He already knew. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a thick leather journal bound in cracked black hide. We don't have much time, he said. You need to understand what this is. Casey glanced toward the house. It's wearing me. Marcus's face tightened. That's the beginning. First it mimics. Then it mirrors. Then Ica. It replaces. He nodded grimly. They're called facelings, entities of imitation, not demons, not ghosts, just echoes that forgot they were echoes. This one latched onto your bloodline decades ago, tethered to an unsealed ritual your mother unknowingly reignited. Casey blinked. My mom? Marcus opened the journal to a yellowed page. Her mother's name was scrawled across the top in faded ink. Beneath it, a set of photos, old Polaroids. A woman standing in front of the same attic mirror, her face obscured by a shadow that didn't belong. She was the first host, he said, but she rejected it, barely. That's why you were born. Different. Casey swallowed. What do you mean different? You're not just a victim, he said quietly. You're a key, a bridge. It's why the mirror calls to you and not others. Your reflection is already cracked. That's why it wants in. She stared at the house, at herself, at the thing that now probably wore her face like a costume. Then how do I stop it? Marcus hesitated. You don't. Casey laughed bitterly. Of course. But you can trap it, he said quickly. If we can isolate the faceling before full replacement, force it back into the mirror realm, we can reseal it permanently. How? He flipped to another page. A hand-drawn sigil, almost fractal in design, stretched across the parchment. Symbols twisted into themselves, shapes that hurt to look at too long. We'll need to perform a reverse invocation. At 3:13 AM sharp, same time it emerged, except this time we call it, we bind it, and we close the gate ourselves. She shook her head. That's in 2 hours. I know. We're not ready. We don't have a choice. Lightning split the sky above them. Thunder followed close behind. In the brief white flash, Casey saw movement in the window of her bedroom, her silhouette, watching them, smiling, like it already knew what came next. Marcus grabbed her arm. Come on! We need to draw the sigil. Salt lines, obsidian corners, iron ward across the attic threshold. Every mark has to be perfect. They ran together back toward the house. As they approached the porch, the front door opened on its own, and from inside, Casey's voice drifted out. I've been waiting. The door creaked wider as they stepped onto the porch, the shadows inside folding back like curtains. A chill slid across Casey's skin. Not from the rain this time, but something far colder, older. The air inside was thick, humming with static and the coppery scent of blood. Her own voice echoed again. Welcome home, Casey. Marcus tightened his grip on the sigil book. Don't answer it. It's not you. Casey nodded, jaw clenched. She could feel the pull now. The thing inside knew her, was her, in some twisted, corrupted way. Every step deeper into the house made her stomach clench. The floor groaned beneath them, as if reacting to their weight or resisting it. The living room was a mess of overturned furniture and shattered lamps. The draped mirrors still trembled under their cloths, twitching like caged animals. Marcus made straight for the dining room, sweeping a thick circle of salt across the hardwood floor. Casey followed, lighting the obsidian shards with a long match just like he'd shown her. The black crystals flared briefly, burning cold blue before settling into a faint glow. We draw it here, Marcus whispered, crouching to trace the sigil onto the floor. We bait it, trap it, seal the breach. Casey glanced toward the hallway, toward the attic stairs. It was up there, wearing her skin, watching and waiting. The sigil was nearly complete when the first mirror screamed. The cloth flew off, whipped away by an invisible force. Casey flinched as the glass pulsed. Yes, pulsed, like a heartbeat. Behind the reflection stood herself, smiling that same impossible smile. Then another mirror flared, then another. The walls began to ripple, reflections duplicating, warping, twisting. Casey staggered back. "It's everywhere. It's panicking," Marcus said. "It knows we're sealing it off." The lights flickered. The air thinned. The house groaned, and from the attic came a wet, dragging sound, like feet shuffling through mud, and then footsteps down the stairs. Slow, deliberate, wrong. Casey turned. There she was, herself. Same face, same body, but not the same eyes. These eyes were hungry, black pupils stretched too wide, iris ringed with mirrored static. The faceling tilted its head. "You've done so well, Casey. All that pain, all that memory. You're almost ready." Marcus stepped forward, holding the journal open like a shield. "Back, now." The entity's smile grew. "Do you really think ink and ash will save her?" Marcus began chanting, low, firm, rhythmic. The sigil burned brighter. The salt hissed, reacting to the power. Casey felt the pull shift, reverse, like the house itself was being sucked inward. The faceling hissed. It lunged. Casey grabbed the iron spike from the mantle just as Marcus barked the last syllable of the invocation. The entity shrieked, caught midair, suspended above the glowing sigil like a puppet snagged mid-leap. It writhed, its skin cracked, and then it split. For 1 second, Casey saw everything. Her childhood fears, her mother crying in the dark, whispering apologies to the mirror, her own reflection smiling when she wasn't, every warped memory, every fractured piece. It had always been there. Always. "Now!" Marcus shouted. Casey stabbed the iron spike down into the center of the sigil. There was a sound like shattering glass and tearing flesh at the same time. The faceling screamed, a sound that wasn't sound at all, more like a pressure in the skull, a chorus of every scream Casey had ever swallowed down. Light exploded from the circle, and then silence. Just the flicker of candlelight. The sigil was burned into the floor, the salt scorched black, the obsidian shards cracked. The entity was gone. Casey sank to her knees, gasping, tears streaming down her cheeks. Marcus dropped beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it." But even as he said it, Casey knew something was off. The house was too quiet. Her ears rang, not from volume, but absence. And then she saw the journal. The pages were all blank. Every page, every sigil, every note. Gone. "I don't think we sealed it," she whispered. Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked up. The mirrors were still trembling, still uncovered. And in every one of them, Casey wasn't there, just empty rooms. And then, in the glass closest to her, something moved. A shape. Small, shivering. A child, a little girl with long brown hair. Casey's voice caught in her throat. "I know her." Marcus followed her gaze. "Who is that?" Casey stood slowly, stepping toward the mirror. The girl turned and smiled. Her eyes weren't human, they were made of glass. And behind her, rising from the darkness, came another shape. Tall, angular, wearing a cracked version of Marcus's face. They say trauma echoes, but what if it doesn't just echo? What if it lingers, breathes, watches? Casey hadn't slept in 42 hours, not truly, not since the night they drove the facing back, or thought they did. She sat hunched in a motel room off Route 6, its peeling wallpaper and flickering light bulb, somehow more comforting than the silence of the house they'd fled. Marcus was asleep on the second bed, fully clothed, one hand still curled protectively around the leather-bound journal, even though it was empty. Casey couldn't stop staring at the mirror. It was cracked, jagged like a spiderweb frozen mid-snap, but still reflected the room back at her, minus her own image. Where she should have been, there was nothing. No outline, no presence, just the beds, the door, the shadow of the lamp. She lifted a hand, the mirror remained still. She blinked hard, heart racing. "I'm still here," she whispered. "I'm not one of them." But even as she said it, she couldn't shake the sensation that she was being watched from the other side of the glass, not by something predatory but familiar. The little girl had appeared in every reflective surface since the ritual, sometimes for seconds, sometimes longer. Once, the girl had whispered Casey's name. She hadn't told Marcus, not yet, because something else was wrong. She was starting to remember things that weren't hers. Images flickering behind her eyes, places she'd never been, names she didn't know, a woman sobbing in a dark church, a spiral staircase that led to a door with no handle. A voice, her voice, reciting words she didn't understand. Salt doesn't cleanse, it binds. Fire doesn't destroy, it reveals. She rose, stepped quietly past Marcus, and walked out into the cold hallway of the motel. The mirror by the ice machine reflected her clearly now, but her eyes were wrong, too dark, ringed with a faint silver gleam. She leaned closer. Behind her, in the glass, the girl stood. She didn't speak this time. She just raised a finger to her lips, then pointed to the stairs. Casey turned, and for a moment the motel seemed deeper than it should be, more than it was. The hallway stretched too far. The lights flickered like a heartbeat. She moved toward the stairwell. With each step, a hum rose in the back of her skull. Not a sound, but a pressure. Words without words. A compulsion. When she reached the bottom, she saw him. Marcus. But not her Marcus. This version stood straighter, moved slower. His smile was tighter, cleaner, surgical. "Casey," he said. "I've been waiting." She froze. "You're not him." "Of course I am," he said gently. "You've just forgotten what we are when we stop fighting it." He raised a hand and opened his palm. Inside was a shard of the mirror from the house, glinting with dark memory. "You left something behind. Come take it." She backed away. "You're not real." "You mean I'm not the version you chose?" he corrected. "But I'm real, more real than that broken boy upstairs." The girl appeared again, beside him, holding his other hand. Casey's breath caught. "Who is she?" His smile widened. "That's the part you forgot." The girl stepped forward. Casey tried to run, but the hall behind her had vanished, swallowed into ink and whisper. The walls began to melt, mirrors stretching like liquid, reflecting thousands of versions of her, all shifting at once, some screaming, some smiling. One was laughing. Marcus stepped closer. "You're remembering now, aren't you? The before." And then, a hand gripped her shoulder, the real Marcus. He yanked her back, through the shimmer of false hallway, into the dim motel corridor. Casey collapsed to her knees, shaking, gasping like she'd broken the surface of deep water. Marcus knelt. "What the hell just happened?" She stared at him. "Marcus, that thing, it looked like you. And the girl," he swallowed. "The reflections, they're not just watching anymore. They're calling back." Casey grabbed his wrist. "We have to go back to the house. There's something we missed, something she's trying to show me." "She?" Casey's voice was barely a breath. "The girl. I think she's part of me." Marcus hesitated. "That's exactly what it wants you to think." "No," she said firmly. "That other Marcus, he wasn't lying, not entirely. There's something before all of this. I remember, a church, a ritual before we ever tried to seal the faceling. I think it's where it began." Marcus paled. "The black altar." Casey blinked. "What?" He nodded slowly. "It was a legend my mother used to whisper about, not a place, a memory shared by survivors of mirror-bound entities, an origin, a convergence point." Casey stood, breath coming fast. "Then that's where we're going." "Casey, we barely survived the first breach. If we open another one, it's not about opening," she interrupted. "It's about closing it from the other side." Marcus stared at her. Then, slowly, he nodded. And from the cracked mirror beside the vending machine, the little girl smiled. The road back to the house was quieter than it had any right to be. Marcus drove with both hands clutched so tightly on the wheel that his knuckles looked like bone. Casey sat in the passenger seat, her eyes locked on the fog-shrouded horizon, watching for any shift in the air, any sign the world might unravel again. They hadn't spoken much since the motel. What was there to say? The girl in the mirror had led her here. Or maybe it wasn't a leading, it was a summoning, and Casey had obeyed. Not like a victim, but like a piece returning to the puzzle it had once been carved from. She whispered something under her breath. Marcus glanced at her. "What did you say?" "I think it's a name," she replied. "Or, not a name, a trigger." He frowned. "A trigger for what?" She didn't answer. Just traced the edge of the journal now lying open in her lap. The pages had been blank for days. Now, they weren't. While Marcus had been showering that morning, the paper began bleeding ink. Not writing, not in any normal sense, but diagrams, spirals, eye-shaped sigils, and one line that repeated over and over, "The altar is not a place, it is a mirror turned inward." Casey had seen it before, in dreams, in flashes behind the girl's eyes. When they finally reached the house, if it could still be called that, Marcus parked 3 houses down. The windows were gone, the front door had vanished entirely, the siding curled like dead skin, and every surface had taken on a sheen that shimmered like wet glass. Casey stepped out first. As soon as her foot touched the cracked sidewalk, the air rippled. A low hum vibrated through her bones, like a tuning fork struck deep within her skull. She felt herself split slightly, just along the edges, like a photo peeling away from its frame. Marcus exhaled behind her. "You feel that too?" She nodded. "It's already bleeding through." They stepped closer. Instead of using the non-existent front door, Casey walked around the back, fingers trailing along the warped siding. The back porch sagged as if exhausted. The sliding door was no longer glass, it was polished obsidian, black as night, cold as a grave. She didn't hesitate. She pressed her hand against it. The surface sucked her in. Not violently. It was like being swallowed by a thought. Marcus followed without a word. They emerged inside the hallway. Except, the hallway wasn't quite right. The angles were wrong, subtly off, like a photograph of a room taken just before a blink. The floor sloped sideways. The wallpaper undulated, as if breathing. The pictures on the walls, portraits that had once shown smiling strangers, now showed blurred, half-reflected versions of Casey and Marcus. Mouths stitched shut. At the end of the corridor, the basement door stood open. Casey didn't look at Marcus. She just descended. The air grew colder with each step. Not the chill of absence, but of observation. Something below remembered them. She reached the bottom, bare feet hitting the concrete. The basement had transformed. Gone was the old boiler and paint-chipped shelves. Now the center of the room held a basin carved from black stone, filled with something that shimmered like mercury. Around it, symbols scrawled in white chalk twisted in on themselves, looping back like snakes eating their tails. Marcus arrived beside her. "This wasn't here before?" "No," Casey whispered. "It was always here. We just couldn't see it." She opened the journal again. The final page now bore a complete sigil. An Ouroboros fused with a child's silhouette, eyes like shattered glass. Underneath it, scrawled in frantic ink, "Reflect her, accept her, bury what was left behind." Casey stepped into the circle. The temperature plummeted. The room groaned, not the house but the space itself. The walls bled silver light, every surface polished into reflective glass. In the basin, the liquid began to ripple, and from it, the girl emerged. Not climbing out, just rising. Her hair hung like seaweed. Her eyes were empty, but not blind. Her dress was torn lace. She said nothing. Casey knelt. "I remember you." The girl blinked once. "You are the fracture," she said. "You are the seam." "I was broken," Casey replied, "but not alone." The girl reached out, touching Casey's forehead, and for one heartbeat, they were the same. Memories surged. A church in the woods, long before the house. Children chanting under moonlight, a figure in red. A mirror used not for reflection but for summoning. Casey saw herself, age 10, cutting her palm above a basin just like this. Saw her twin, pale and wide-eyed, watching from the mirror's other side. They'd sealed her away, forgotten her, left her behind. And now? Now she was waking up. The girl's voice echoed inside her skull. You cannot close the door without letting the key remember where it was hidden. Casey stumbled back. Marcus caught her, eyes wide. What did she do to you? She didn't do anything, Casey whispered. I did. A long time ago. Suddenly the room lurched, glass cracked. From the corners, something began to crawl. Limbs too long, faces like melted porcelain, mouths full of static. The reflections were bleeding through. The ritual had stirred them, invited them. Marcus drew a blade from his coat. Tell me you have a plan. I don't, she said, standing shakily. But she does. The girl floated back toward the basin, raised one hand, and the walls screamed, not sound, but memory. The mirror behind them shattered inward, revealing a second door, a black frame filled with shifting light, a threshold. Casey turned to Marcus. We have to go through. I think that's where it ends, or where it started. Marcus stared into the portal. On the other side, a church bell tolled once, twice, and then Marcus's reflection didn't follow. In the mirror shard by Casey's foot, his mirrored self just stood there, smiling. As Marcus stepped forward, the reflection reached out and switched places. Casey screamed. The real Marcus vanished into the mirror, and the other one turned to her, now inside her world. He smiled. Now we begin again. Deep Tuck, Chapter 5. Van han wan han trin chong chio kujion panchion fanxia wei kwasui tuwe, duai tue et vong dijion hai. Marcus Thuk Su, Banda Noi. Hai Viet Chapter 5. Ban 1. Seo Tung Dan Yi Puan Yi Do. A Chu Vui Do Da Yi La Trien 1202. Chui Pong Xiak Viet Va Trun Du Liamach Kang. Note 9 Milk Qua, Kao Trut Nuwa. Hai Trui Van Pong Kach Viet Va Trun Du Liamach Kang. Hai No Cho Kao Huk Modal. Chat GBT Denoi Doila Chapter 5, Ban 1. Teep Noi Truk. Teep Tu Fan Truok, Mo Right Hand Trin. Hui Du Rei Ti, Kong Che, Kong Chien, Fan Chu, Void Kong Chi Ritual Horror, Psychological Horror, Kang Tang, Ketap Yu to Twisted Reality, Distorted Identity, Suvo Venjua the Vajia. The AI header takes Suvo Venjua the Vajia. You can't scream in a mirror world, not really. When Casey opened her mouth, no sound came out, only fog, heavy and metallic, like breath exhaled under deep water. Her throat burned from the effort, but the scream simply coiled inside her, swallowed by the cold, polished air around her. Marcus was gone, or at least the real Marcus. What stood across from her now wore his face, his clothes, even mimicked his familiar size, but his eyes were too knowing. There was no fear, no urgency, just calm. A cold, patient calm, like someone reading a script they'd memorized long ago. The new Marcus stepped forward. Casey stumbled back. This isn't real, she whispered, unsure if the words actually left her mouth. You're not him. I am what he never could be, the thing said, voice identical but flattened. The version that never needed doubt, or guilt, or choice. She backed toward the mirror frame, but it had closed. There was no glass now, just an expanse of black stone where the threshold had been. The clone, or whatever it was, kept walking toward her. Casey, he said, gently. You opened the gate. You summoned me. You completed the mirror. No, she snapped. I was trying to save him. You don't get to save what's already inside. He smiled, then turned and walked calmly toward the stairs. Where are you going? She yelled. The thing didn't look back. To finish what we started. She ran after him, but as her foot hit the bottom step, the basement split in half. Not collapsed, split, like pages of a book being peeled apart. The floor rolled into itself and the walls melted sideways, revealing a corridor that hadn't been there before, lined with infinite mirrors. Each one reflected not just her body, but versions of her. Crying, screaming, bleeding, some laughing madly, one banged silently against the glass. And down that hallway she saw Marcus, the real one, naked, bound at the wrists, suspended mid-air like a puppet with severed strings. His eyes were shut tight, lips murmuring something, again and again, a chant. Casey broke into a sprint. The corridor twisted beneath her feet, forcing her sideways. Gravity became uncertain. Mirrors tilted, rotating like doors. Her own reflection warped, flickering between states, childhood versions of herself, the girl in the white dress, the adult she barely recognized. Voices whispered from behind the glass. You left her. You buried her. You broke the pact. No, Casey gasped. I didn't choose this. One of the mirrors shattered outward, slicing her shoulder. She stumbled, blood smearing the obsidian floor. Behind her, the sound of something crawling echoed, wet hands, nails dragging across glass. It wasn't just reflections watching anymore. Something had come through. She reached Marcus. He was suspended in a silver cocoon, threads of mirror light winding around his arms and chest, digging into his skin. She touched the nearest thread. A shock pulsed through her body. Memories, not hers, rushed into her head. Marcus at age 6, hiding under a church pew. Marcus 17, digging something behind a chapel. Marcus, years ago, lighting candles beside another girl. A girl with Casey's eyes, but not her name. She jerked her hand away, breathing hard. The cocoon responded, slowly uncoiling. Marcus gasped. His eyes fluttered open. Casey? She wanted to cry. He was still in there. But before she could answer, the corridor shifted again. Footsteps echoed. The other Marcus stepped out from the shadows, no longer smiling. You shouldn't have followed. Casey stepped in front of Marcus's suspended form. I'm taking him back. No, the clone said. You're just switching roles again. He lifted one hand and the walls groaned. Reflections bled down like paint. The corridor narrowed, the mirrors now displaying Marcus's deepest fears. A grave, a burning church, a mirror with no reflection. Casey's skin stung as whispers filled her ears. She clenched her fists. You said the mirror was a key, she whispered, not a cage. The clone tilted his head. And keys must choose. That's when she remembered the phrase etched in the journal. Reflect her. Accept her. Bury what was left behind. She turned back to Marcus, whose eyes were fading again. And then, without thinking, Casey took her own hand and pressed it into the mirror beside her. The glass cracked. She forced her reflection forward. Her duplicate screamed as it was pulled into her, and for one breathless moment, Casey felt the fracture complete. The girl in the white dress slid into her bones, not fighting this time, but settling, joining. A lock clicked inside her chest. When she looked up again, the clone Marcus stepped back, eyes wide. You merged. Casey stood, bloodied, breathless, but whole. No more halves. And then she reached forward, grabbed Marcus from the cocoon, and dragged him through the collapsing mirror. They tumbled through shattered light, through whispers, through screams, until the sound vanished and they landed in the middle of the church. Not the house, not the dream, the church, the original place where it had all started. But it was abandoned, dust thick in the air, candles melted into warped stumps, symbols scrawled across the walls in dried ash. Casey sat up, gasping. Marcus stirred beside her. Then his eyes shot wide, and from behind the altar, a bell began to toll. 1, 2, 3 times. Then silence. A child's giggle echoed from the far end of the nave, and Casey turned to see a little girl sitting in the first pew, wearing the same white dress, but this one was smiling, and her eyes were Casey's. The little girl in the white dress didn't move. She sat quietly in the first pew, legs swinging back and forth, eyes never leaving Casey's face. Casey stared back. It wasn't just her eyes. It was everything. The way she tilted her head, the way her hands gripped the edge of the seat, the slight scar above her right brow, earned from a fall down the back porch steps when she was 6. She remembered the taste of blood, the scream, the warm arms of her mother. But this girl wasn't crying. She was waiting. Marcus sat beside her on the cold stone floor, still catching his breath. He was pale, lips trembling from the cold, or maybe from the shock of what he'd seen inside the mirror corridor. Casey stood. The air in the church was heavy, like something sacred had been long desecrated. Cobwebs hung from the rafters like wilted veils. The stained glass was cracked, letting in slivers of broken daylight, light that bent wrong, as if filtered through something ancient and wounded. "Do you know why you're here?" the girl asked suddenly. Her voice was soft, but rang clear through the empty nave. Casey hesitated. "I came to stop this." "No," the girl smiled. "You came to finish it." She stood, and when she did, the walls of the church shifted. What had once been wood and stone peeled away like wet bark, revealing mirror beneath. Not reflective glass, but liquid silver, rippling gently. Every wall, every pillar, every inch of space now bore Casey's face in 1,000 slight variations. The church had become the mirror. And the girl in the white dress, the original Casey, stood in the center, arms outstretched. "You broke the reflection," she said. "You took back what was left behind. Now you must bury it." Marcus clutched her arm. "Don't listen to her. She's part of the ritual. That thing feeds on identity. It wants to finish absorbing you." But Casey wasn't sure anymore. Everything around her felt familiar in the worst way. The cracked altar, the smell of iron and lilies, the echo of prayers she didn't remember speaking aloud. Reflect her, accept her, bury what was left behind. She walked forward slowly. "What happens if I do?" The girl's eyes flickered, one moment innocent, the next ancient. "You seal the mirror, you end the hunger, but one must remain inside. That is the law." Casey froze. Of course, every mirror is a gate, but every gate needs a guardian. One version of her had to stay inside to keep the boundary intact. That was the trade. That was the reason the ritual kept repeating generation after generation. One girl enters, one girl forgets. One girl watches the gate until it's her turn to be remembered. Marcus stood up beside her. "No," he said. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," the girl said softly. "You of all people should know that." Casey turned. "What does she mean?" Marcus's jaw clenched. He looked away. "I didn't know what the ritual meant until it was too late. The mirror chose me once, but I ran. I left you behind, even before we met. I wasn't supposed to survive," Casey blinked. "You?" "That church we saw in the memory," he whispered. "The one burning. I was inside. I broke the mirror then, just like you did now. I saw someone waiting, someone like you, but I was too scared. I ran, and the cycle found you instead." Casey felt like the air had been knocked from her lungs. So many things made sense now. Why Marcus always feared silence, why he flinched at his own reflection, why he never spoke about his past. He'd been marked long before her. The girl in white approached them both. "It's not punishment," she said gently. "It's balance." Casey looked down at her hands, at the faint shimmer that now danced across her skin. Her heartbeat echoed inside her skull like a war drum. She could feel the mirror inside her now, alive, changing. She had minutes, maybe seconds. Marcus reached for her. "Let me go back in," he whispered. "I started this." "No," Casey said. "I broke it. I'm the crack, not you." "But She kissed him. It wasn't long, it wasn't final. It was just enough to say everything that words couldn't. Then she turned, walked past the pews, past the flickering candles, to the altar. The girl was already waiting there, hands folded. Casey knelt. "Tell me what to do," she said. The girl smiled. "You already know." She extended her palm, and Casey took it. The world rippled. The air folded inward. Marcus screamed, but the sound was muted like he was underwater. He tried to run, but the mirror walls closed around him, keeping him on the outside, keeping him safe. Casey was already fading, her outline blurring, like a reflection caught mid-breath. She looked back one last time, saw him pounding on the glass, saw his mouth form her name, and then stillness, a long, deep, sacred silence. The mirror sealed. The girl in white vanished, and on the floor of the ruined church, Marcus collapsed, alone, surrounded by dozens of mirrors, all of them cracked, all of them empty, except one, the very first, the mirror above the altar, and in it Casey stared back. But she did not blink, she did not speak, she did not move, she only watched. And then, just before the chapter closed, her reflection smiled. The silence had weight now. It wasn't just the absence of sound, but something denser, like the space around Marcus had thickened, congealed into a memory too heavy to hold. He sat motionless on the cracked floor of the altar room, the candlelight long extinguished, the ruined church swallowed in dusk. The mirrors that once shimmered now stood dull, as if mourning. Only one still flickered faintly, the first, the original, the one above the altar. Casey was in there, or something that looked like her. Marcus couldn't be sure anymore. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass, half hoping, half dreading she'd blink. Speak, move. But her eyes, Casey's eyes, were glassy, eternal, caught somewhere between resignation and something more terrifying, acceptance. She had taken the place of the guardian, and now she was the boundary. He whispered her name again, but his voice felt wrong in this place, like it didn't belong. Even the echo came back different, delayed, warped, like something else repeated it from a great distance. Outside, the wind stirred. Somewhere in the dark woods, beyond the broken windows, the trees shifted, carrying voices that sounded too much like whispers. Marcus knew the ritual wasn't over. The hunger didn't die, it just slept. He stood up slowly, legs shaking, as if he'd aged decades in the span of a day. The church was changing again, not violently, not quickly, but subtly. Its shape remained, but its mood was bleeding, like ink on water. The benches warped into strange angles. The aisle seemed to stretch further. The shadows grew bold, curling upward like fingers reaching from below. This wasn't a sanctuary anymore. It was a threshold, and Marcus was still inside. "She's not gone," he muttered. "She's not gone." Not like the others. That had to count for something. He retraced his steps through the corridor, moving deeper into the body of the church. Every room he passed now contained a new variation of the mirror, a cracked pane, a warped reflection, a forgotten face suspended mid-scream. They watched him. Some whispered, some wept. Some grinned wide enough to split glass. He passed the room where they'd found the twin mirrors, the ones that led them in circles, and saw himself in one, barely recognizable, eyes hollow, skin ashen. The version of himself that had stayed too long. "You don't belong here," it whispered. "No," Marcus said, but neither did she. He stepped forward, raising the iron shard he'd kept hidden in his sleeve, the piece of the broken frame from the altar mirror. Not to fight, not to escape, but to carve. Rituals, like locks, could be reversed if you had the map. Casey had cracked the mirror's laws by entering willingly, by accepting the reflection. Maybe Marcus could do the same, but in reverse. He began marking the symbols on the floor, mimicking the sigils they had passed without understanding. Lines, curves, intersections. Blood. He needed blood. He didn't hesitate. The iron shard bit into his palm. As he drew, he began to hum. Not a melody, but a counter-rhythm, the opposite of the chant they'd heard on arrival. Where the original was binding, this was unwinding. Where the ritual had imprisoned Casey, this one called her back. Or at least, it tried, because halfway through the final stroke, the church screamed. Not in sound, but in vibration. The walls pulsed. The glass convulsed. The mirrors rattled violently, and from every surface hundreds of faces emerged, trapped versions of past girls, past versions of himself, Casey's reflections, some twisted beyond recognition. They were not pleased. He stumbled back. The sigils on the floor glowed faintly, then flickered out. Not enough. He needed her. He ran back to the altar room, the iron shard still slick in his hand. Casey's reflection had changed. She was watching him again, but now her lips were parted, not in speech, in warning. Behind him, the hallway groaned, and from the shadows emerged something tall, something ancient. The Keeper. It didn't walk. It unfolded. Pale limbs, draped in the mimicry of robes that shimmered like black oil. Its face was not a face, just a smooth surface, like a mirror that had forgotten how to reflect. Marcus backed against the altar, the mirror vibrating against his spine. The creature stared without eyes. "You broke the trade," it said, not aloud, but from within him. Its voice sounded like cracked glass reforming. "She took the vow. The gate was sealed." Marcus lifted the shard, trembling. I didn't come to break it. I came to share it." That made the creature pause. For the first time, it tilted its head, like it was curious. "I was marked too," Marcus whispered. "Years ago. I ran then. She didn't. Let me take it now. Let her out." The silence that followed was visceral. The air tightened. The church held its breath. Then, the Keeper raised a hand, and every mirror in the church shattered at once. Except one. The altar mirror remained, untouched. Inside it, Casey blinked, and then she spoke. "I don't want to go." Marcus felt the world stop. She looked sad, conflicted, but also resolved. "I chose to stay. I remembered everything. I can hold the boundary, Marcus, but only if you forget me." "No," he said. "Don't ask me that. You have to," she whispered. "It's the only way this gate will close forever. You have to walk away, leave the church, leave me." He sobbed, shook his head. "No." She pressed a hand to the glass. "I'm not trapped. I'm becoming, and you have to be free." The Keeper moved aside, as if the choice had shifted from him to Marcus. All around him, the ruin stilled. He looked once more at her. Then he stepped back and turned toward the doors. Each step was thunder. Each breath was agony. He reached the threshold, and just before he crossed it, he heard her voice again, faint from within the mirror. "Don't forget the name of the next girl who hears the glass whisper." Then he stepped outside, and the doors slammed shut. A year had passed since Marcus left the church. A year had passed since the mirror no longer reflected the familiar gaze, and he had learned to live with it. Now Marcus lived in a small town in northern Vermont, where the wind did not whisper and the nights did not invite false memories. He rented a modest cabin, nestled in the foothills, surrounded by maples that glowed red in the fall and were quietly covered in snow in the winter. Every morning he woke early, made coffee, looked out at the woods, and wrote. Write. Not about Casey, not directly, just fragments, images flickering. A girl standing between the two mirrors. A hand imprinted on the glass. A ritual someone had performed wrong, an eyeless creature waiting for the last wrong step. The townspeople thought Marcus was a former teacher who had retired early for health reasons. Quiet, introverted, but polite and gentle. No one asked too many questions. No one pried into his past, exactly as he wished. But on cold nights when breath froze on the glass and the clock on the table crept toward 3:00 a.m., Marcus couldn't help but walk to the bedroom mirror. No lights on, no ritual, just looking. And in that moment he swore the mirror shook. He didn't see Casey, but there was another shadow. No face, no outline, just a presence. Like when you know someone is standing right behind you, but you don't dare turn around. The next morning he took the mirror down. This time he didn't smash it. just wrapped it in black cloth and took it to the back storage room, buried deep under boxes of old books and broken picture frames. But he knew it wouldn't do any good, for the crack was within him. Late that fall, the town welcomed a new resident. Her name was Eloise Harper, a young woman with fiery red hair carrying an old wooden box, a few old books, and a large oval mirror wrapped carefully in several layers of ash gray linen. Eloise rented a room above the used bookstore, just across the street from the cafe Marcus frequented every Tuesday morning. The first time he saw her was when she opened the second-floor window, dusting the mirror and letting the light shine through the hand-carved edges of the glass. He paused for just a second, and it felt like the mirror blinked. Eloise smiled.
Not in a polite way, more like recognizing him. Marcus avoided her gaze, turning away quickly. The coffee cooled in his hand. The back of his shirt was damp with sweat despite the cold wind. That night, he found the old notebook. The last page was still unfinished, a plan of the church, the placement of the mirrors, symbols scattered on the floor. The last handwritten line, "If a person enters and does not leave, the mirror remembers." 3 days later, Eloise went to the bookstore to buy a Gothic novel. The owner, Monsieur Walden, was chatty, and when he learned that she had recently moved from New Hampshire, he happily introduced her to some old landmarks, including an abandoned church about 5 miles south of town. "There's a strange legend about that place," Mr. Walden said, handing over a Civil Warrior map. "They say it can reflect whatever the soul wants to see most, but it can also trap it forever." Eloise just laughed. "Then it's a good thing I don't have a soul," she said, her voice as light as mist. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He dreamed of collapsing church columns. Mirrors shattered but made no sound. Each shard was a mouth, lipless, toothless, just the idea of laughter. And standing in the rubble was Eloise, wearing a black dress, holding a mirror without a glass frame. She looked straight at him, her eyes expressionless. You remember. The voice was not hers, Casey's. He woke with a start, his heart pounding, his back covered in cold sweat. Just then, there was a knock on the door. 3 beats, short, insistent. Marcus didn't dare open it. No one was there. The next morning, but in front of his door, a small piece of mirror. There was still dried blood on the edge. The next day, Eloise went to the cafe. She sat by the window where Marcus often sat and flipped open the old book, underlining a passage. "Some mirrors don't show you who you are. They show who you were, if you had stayed." When Marcus entered, she didn't look at him, but as he passed, she said softly enough for only he to hear, "Someone's still calling for you." Marcus froze. "Excuse me?" he asked softly. Eloise looked up. Her eyes were calm, but the depths of them were as deep as unwashed glass. "I said," she repeated, "sometimes you have to go back, to close the door completely." "No," Marcus shook his head. "I left. I accepted." She smiled. "The thing is, Marcus, she never let you go. That night, Marcus heard the bell ring. From where? There was no church nearby that was still in operation. But the bells still rang. 1, 2, 3, 4. And by the 13th, Marcus realized something undeniable. The mirror was open again. Cliffhanger at the end of the chapter. At the house on the hill, the mirror that Marcus had hidden in the closet began to ring. And that was the last chapter of our story. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening, for feeling, and for staying with us through every twist, every whisper, and every broken mirror. Stories like this aren't just about fear. They're about what lingers, the silence after the scream, the shadow just outside the frame. Is the question that refuses to be answered. So if tonight you find yourself looking into a mirror just a little too long, and you swear something looked back, just remember, some doors never truly close and some reflections weren't meant to be yours. From all of us behind the scenes, the writers, the editors, the midnight coffee drinkers, thank you for letting us share this story with you. If you enjoyed the ride, Don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. It helps more than you know. Until the next nightmare, stay safe, and whatever you do, don't answer when the mirror knocks. Good night.